I am going to talk a little bit more about some of the practices I mentioned in the keynote, and then I have built in some time for questions, so we can do that. It's a big space, so it might not be ideal. We'll see how it works out. But certainly I welcome any comments or things that you would like to add or chit-chat, whatever floats your boat. So hello again. I am going to talk about some of those behavioral concepts that I mentioned in the keynote in a little bit more detail with some more examples. We're going to talk about structure, actively engaging students, behavior-specific feedback, and hopefully by the end of this session you can describe and implement these strategies or support others' implementation of these. Really think about behavior-specific feedback in terms of a consequence for both appropriate and inappropriate behavior. So again, this is where my normal introductory banter happens, but we've already, you spent an hour already listening to that, so let's go ahead and move on. I am going to start by talking about the three-term contingency, which is probably very familiar to most of you, but bear with me. Like I said earlier, we don't give teachers enough credit for being able to take the mechanisms of behavior and apply it in their classrooms. So whenever I do any work with classroom teachers or educators or any population really, school psychologists, school nurses, any group, I like to make sure we start here so we all understand how behavior works. Okay? And all behavior follows a predictable sequence. There's an antecedent, which is any stimulus that precedes a behavior. Okay, this is what's going to trigger or occasion a behavior, and it could be anything. It could be the bell ringing, it could be the teacher saying, take out your math book, it could be just being in school, it could be the time of day. Anything can be an antecedent. Okay? The behavior, as I talked about earlier, is an observable and measurable act. Okay, so you want to make sure that if you're talking about behavior, that it's something you can see and measure. And not only is that important for students to be able to understand exactly what's expected of them. So if you just tell students to be respectful, they may not know what that means. But if you tell them to sit oriented toward the teacher when he or she is talking, make sure they have their feet on the floor, make sure they have their writing utensil ready to go, those are behaviors that students can actually visualize and engage in versus just being respectful. The other thing to think about is when we are issuing consequences for inappropriate behavior, we want to make sure that our expectations for behavior are very clear. And if you look at the literature on school discipline, and this has been going on for decades, if you look at disparity in school discipline between students of color and white students, you will see that students of color are written up for offenses like being disrespectful, being disobedient, loitering, more often than white students who are written up for things like vandalism, being out of bounds, being tardy, things that are very clear and objective, right? If we are operationalizing all of our behaviors, if we're defining our behaviors, you're either doing them or you're not. So we don't leave it up to the teacher to decide if somebody's being disrespectful or not. If we have a very specific set of behaviors, we're going to be more consistent with our consequences. And that's really important if we ever hope to close some of those disparities that we've been seeing for years and years and years. Consequences are what's actually going to increase or decrease the behavior in the future. Pleasant consequences are going to increase the likelihood of behavior in the future. Unpleasant consequences, the behavior will probably stop or at least not happen again. And should you think that this is nonsense, or if you don't believe in behaviorism, or if you think B.F. Skinner was wrong, which I would be very sad if you thought that, or if you think I'm just making this up, it doesn't matter how you feel about these behavioral mechanisms, because the deal is they're affecting you whether you believe in them or not, or whether this is the first time you're ever seeing this. It doesn't matter, okay? When you go into a dark room, what is the first thing that you do? You turn on the light, you flip the light switch, right? You like light. In the past, the antecedent of a dark room, you engage in the behavior of flipping on the light switch, the light comes on, bam, you're reinforced with light. You enjoy light, presumably, so now anytime you go into a dark room, you engage in that behavior. Okay? Nobody taught you that. Nobody said, listen, the antecedent is the dark room, the observable measurable behavior, flipping the light switch, the consequence is light if you keep engaging. You just learned that if you engage in that behavior, you got light, light is awesome, so you just kept doing it. Okay? Behavioral concepts work whether you know about them or not. Okay, so you might as well spend some time thinking about them because it impacts everything you do and it impacts everything that our students do. So this concept of reinforcement increases the likelihood of a behavior. So positive reinforcement is when we add something to the environment. Negative reinforcement is when we take away something from the environment. Both of them increase behavior in the future. This gets nerdy for like just 1 second, and then we go back to jokes. In the light switch scenario, that's positive reinforcement. We're adding light to the environment, and you keep engaging in the behavior. Okay? Negative reinforcement means we remove something unpleasant, and the learner keeps engaging in the behavior. So you'll hear people say negative reinforcement, they'll use the term incorrectly. The best example of negative reinforcement is probably from your own automobile. When you get in the car and you turn the key in the ignition and you hear ding, 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 what is that noise telling you to do? Put on your seatbelt, and what happens when you do that? You engage in that behavior, the noise goes away. In the future, you're likely to keep engaging in wearing your seatbelt. That's negative reinforcement. We remove something unpleasant, you keep engaging in the behavior. Anytime a behavior is reinforced, it increases in the future. That's the definition of reinforcement. So here are a couple of examples. Raphael is often late to class. When he arrives, his peers clap. They say things like, hey, we're glad you finally showed up, buddy. He sits down and smiles, but not until he has high-fived a couple of his friends. What is going on here, behaviorally speaking? Good. So what would we call that in behavioral terminology? He's getting a lot of attention for his behavior. He's being positively reinforced for that behavior. And he's going to keep doing it because peer attention is awesome. Okay? Another example, Roger doesn't care for his math teacher. During class, he swears and tears up his work, which results in him getting sent to the principal's office, where he hangs out with the secretary and other rule breakers. What is going on here, behaviorally speaking, with Roger? Okay, so I heard negative reinforcement and I heard positive reinforcement. This is one of those rare instances where everybody is correct, right? What are we removing from the environment? The class, right? So he's getting away from the teacher, he's getting away from the class, and what are we adding to the environment? Chatting, he gets all this attention, he gets to hang out with his peers that are in trouble. Who else is getting negatively reinforced here? The teacher, that's exactly right, because now the teacher doesn't have to deal with Roger. So this is a big problem, right? Because now Roger engages in these behaviors in math class, and if it works really well for him, he gets out of math, he gets all this attention, now he's in English class. And he says, oh, this kind of sucks. I'm going to start engaging in problem behavior. And then he's going to generalize that behavior because it's really effective for him to get out of class. Okay? And also, the teacher may start engaging in this behavior to get rid of students that are problematic. So that's how behavior works. If a behavior is functional for you, you're going to keep doing it. Teachers like graphic organizers, so I've included one just so you can enjoy it. Okay? When you have an observable and measurable act, there are 4 consequences that are going to increase or decrease the likelihood of that behavior in the future. 2 of them require adding something to the environment, positive reinforcement, positive punishment. 2 of them require taking something away from the environment, negative reinforcement and negative punishment. Positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement both increase behavior. Positive punishment and negative punishment both decrease behavior. Okay? I'm not going to talk a lot about punishment because that's not really the focus of my talk on positive and proactive classroom management. But punishment is a term that we don't actually use correctly in schools. If a behavior is punished, it actually decreases in the future. If the things that we thought were punishing were actually punishing, you wouldn't see the same kids on your in-school suspension list every day. Okay? You wouldn't see the same kids in detention. You wouldn't see the same kids in the teacher's in the principal's office every day because those consequences would actually decrease behavior. The problem with consequences that we use in schools is that they usually don't do that very well. Okay. So who cares about any of this? Why start with graphic organizers and reinforcement and thinking about this? Okay. If you understand how behavior works, it's very helpful in education. Okay. If you can think about what's reinforcing a behavior, you actually have a much better chance of decreasing that behavior. If you look at Roger's situation, instead of thinking, oh, this kid is a pain, we need to do something with him, if you look at what's happening every time he engages in those behavior, what we need to do is change what we're doing with him. We need to maybe teach him how to take a break. Maybe he needs more math skills. Maybe if we do remove him from the educational environment, it's to someplace he doesn't actually like being. Okay? We need to be thinking about how the behavior works. Tricks will fail you, but behavioral science never will. You will always flip on the light switch when you go into a dark room. Okay? We like fads and trendy things in education, but this will never change. Behaviors followed by pleasant consequences will keep happening. Okay? If you know certain consequences increase the likelihood of behaviors you want to see, you can arrange the environment so those consequences will be there. If students like attention, Raphael likes attention. Okay, maybe if he can come to class on time, he can be the helper with the lesson, or maybe he can pass out papers, or maybe he can have 5 minutes at the end of class to socialize. All of those are much less disruptive than everybody high-fiving him when he walks in 5 minutes late. Okay? So thinking about how those concepts apply. Another behavioral concept that impacts student behavior is setting events. Okay? So there's our 3-term contingency. The setting event is something that happens prior to the antecedent. Setting events can be almost anything. So what they do is change the value of the consequence temporarily. So for instance, normally when I do a talk like this or when I'm coming to present, I like to get a good night's sleep, show up early. The antecedent is Amanda calling me and saying, hey, Diane, I want you to come up and present. My behavior is showing up early so I can make sure the technology works, and get to talk to people and catch up with some friends that I haven't seen in a long time. And then the behavior, the consequence is pleasant chit-chat. I'm relaxed and ready to go when things happen. So that's normal. Antecedent behavior consequence. However, if there's a setting event, like my flight got in really late, or I was up all night watching the French Open, which is not on until next week, or something like that, or I'm not feeling well, me getting here early is going to be much less valuable. Suddenly that extra hour of sleep or that need to go to Dunkin' Donuts is going to be more valuable. Setting events change our sort of normal behavioral patterns. And the reason that we need to think about them with students is because they experience them all the time. So for instance, you might have a student in your class who's really a good student who you say, okay, there's going to be a quiz on Wednesday. That's an antecedent. His behavior is usually to go home and study for the quiz, and the consequence is a decent grade. If something happens with that student, if he has a big fight with his parents, or DCF comes to the house over the weekend, or he doesn't have breakfast or something, suddenly that grade is not that valuable. Okay? That's how setting events impact what normally happens. What are some of the other setting events that our students might face? What are some of the things that our students might face on a daily basis that can impact their behavior? Yes?
How the bus ride in goes?
Sure. So the bus ride or the walk to school, if there's a fight on the bus or something unpleasant happens, or even if the student walks in the building and a teacher says, take your hat off, and that's the first interaction the student has all day, that's going to set the tone for the day. Good. What else? Yeah, events at home, anything going on, fight with sibling, fight with parents, parents not home, so anything can happen. What else? No breakfast. Same thing, so hunger, a bad night's sleep, allergies, anything like that can impact students' normal sort of patterns of behavior. What is the biggest issue with setting events for teachers? Yeah, most of the time you have no idea that they even occurred. Okay, how can you have a better sense of what's going on with your students? Right, so building those relationships, okay? If you are paying attention to how your students behave on a daily basis, you're saying good morning to them or hello when they come into the classroom, student seems a little bit off, that's your chance to follow up. Hey, is everything okay? Is there anything going on that I need to know about? Okay, who else can give you information about setting events? Right, parents, families, the better relationship you have with them, the more likely they are to be able to give you some information. Okay, so what to do with this information? A student comes in, he's normally a pretty happy guy, he comes in and doesn't seem happy. You say, hey, what's going on? He said, I have a big fight on the bus. If you know that that student has a hard time with group work anyway, maybe you let him work alone that day. Maybe you say, hey, you know what, you can pick your partner today. And this is not a good long-term solution, but we can use that information to decrease the likelihood of inappropriate behaviors. Okay? A couple more behavioral concepts before we get into the practices themselves. The first one is extinction, which is when a previously reinforced behavior is no longer reinforced, and then the behavior slowly goes away. So for our friend Rafa, who was walking into the classroom and high-fiving everybody, what happens if his buddies get tired of that and stop high-fiving him? Is he still going to come in late? Probably not, right? Once a behavior is not reinforced anymore, people stop doing it, okay? That's why many of you probably took a foreign language in high school that you no longer speak because you just didn't do it anymore because there was no reason to do it, and then it just kind of goes away, right? We lose behaviors and skills that aren't reinforced. With Extinction, this can help teachers understand why behavior change can be slow. It's hard to get rid of behaviors. Think about my example from earlier this morning about your drive to work. Like, that behavior is always kind of there. It may pop up every now and then. Okay? Think about the extinction burst. So when you go into that dark room and you flip the light switch and the light doesn't come on, what do? Right, like you flip it like 100 more times, right? You're like, what is happening? And what's going on is your brain is like, normally you get reinforced for this behavior. We're not getting any reinforcement. Intensify the level of behavior, stat, okay? And that's what you start doing, and then eventually you get, you figure you have to change the light bulb or whatever. So with students, what I'll see teachers do a lot is they'll say, oh, okay, I learned a little bit about positive reinforcement and function. This student is talking out to get my attention. So I'm going to not provide any attention to that student. So the student who's one of these, miss, that person, you say, you know what, Myers said something about not giving attention to the behavior, so I'm going to ignore that student. So is that student going to say, I'm no longer receiving contingent attention for this behavior, so I'm going to stop engaging in this behavior and find a more socially? That's not what's going to happen, right? What's going to happen is he's going to go, he's going to start banging on the desk, there's going to be other things happening, and that's what we call an extinction burst. Okay, and the worst thing you can do is let it get to this totally unacceptable level and then say, stop it, because now you've reinforced a whole new level of the problem behavior. So if you are going to try and withhold attention for some kind of attention-seeking behavior, we need to provide the student with a better way to get our attention. And we need to be providing lots, oh, I like how you're sitting there quietly. Oh my goodness, did you want to raise your hand? As long as the student is getting plenty of attention, there will be less of a need to engage in inappropriate behaviors. Okay? And then function is the most important thing we can think about in terms of behavior. Function is why someone does something. So the next time you're with a student or with your significant other, with your own kids, or anyone who seems to be engaging in a behavior that you don't like, the question is really not, why are you doing that? Okay, the question is really, what are you trying to get, or what are you trying to get away from? Because the function of behavior can only be to get something or get away from something. What are a lot of students trying to get with their inappropriate behavior? A lot of times it's attention, right? Sometimes it's teacher attention, sometimes it's peer attention. Okay? And what are they trying to escape from with their behavior? Sometimes it's work, sometimes it's attention, sometimes it's a particular class, sometimes it's you, right? It could be a whole host of different things, but that's the question. So if the student is trying to get out of class, we need to find maybe a more appropriate way for him or her to take a break. If a student's trying to get attention, we need to find a more appropriate way to get attention. We can't say stop doing that and not give an alternative behavior. Okay? So all behaviors function to gain or avoid something. And now I will show you a cartoon, because you've been very patient with my behaviorism lecture, which will tie together behavior, function, and extinction. I give you cat versus internet. So this is a cat engaging in a typical feline-based behavior. Now I know that you just got like a 15-minute lesson in behaviorism, but even with that amount of information, you should be able to take a guess as to the function of this cat's behavior. What would you say it is? He's trying to get his owner's attention. So he engages in a perfectly normal behavior that results in attention. He meows at the owner not having it, not providing any contingent attention. So the cat engages in an increased level of the behavior. 2 meows. Okay, moves a little closer. 3 meows, moves a little closer still. Okay, so this is the increasing intensity of the behavior because the cat is used to getting attention for these kind of behaviors. So this goes on for a while, so just relax and just this, a lot of increases in the behavior. So the cat makes physical contact with the owner, changes vocalizations, okay? If you can and you have that miss student that I was talking about, picture that student's face right on the little cat, and then you'll see what happens here. So the cat gets a little bit closer, the cat gets on the back, he's still purring. The owner is not having it, he's completely engaged in whatever he's doing, so the cat starts whistling. whispering, still nothing. The cat somehow gets his hands on a loudspeaker. I don't know how, he doesn't have thumbs, but he works it out. Okay, so he uses that, still nothing. He gets a little chart, which I like, because there are data in the chart, which I appreciate. So reasons to pet the cat, still nothing. He comes in with night vision goggles, though it's clearly daytime. He's got a catapult. He YouTubes himself, still nothing. Okay, he makes himself Batman. As a last resort, I know, it's adorable. He throws himself an awesome party with balloons that mysteriously only go up to cat height. He has a cake, some punch, but still nothing. A game of Twister, I can't imagine what they were going to do with that, but still nothing. So these increasingly intensive and adorable behaviors do not result in the desired consequence. So the cat, justifiably frustrated, decides to take a different path, thinks about a different behavior, goes into the other room, starts scratching the furniture, voila. Now has the attention that he was so desperately seeking with all of those more socially appropriate and adorable behaviors. What is this cat going to do the next time he wants attention? He's going to scratch the furniture, right? And we do this with students a lot. We'll give them attention for their inappropriate behavior, but we don't do as good of a job when they're doing what we want them to do. And I touched on that this morning, and I'll mention it again, because if we spend as much time paying attention to students' appropriate behavior as we did to their inappropriate behavior, we would probably tip the scales in terms of the behavior that we see the most often. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about classroom management practices and evidence-based practices in classroom management. You saw this slide, or at least some version of it, sneak by this morning. Okay, we've done a lot of research in this area and found that there's 5 big categories of evidence-based practices in classroom management: maximizing structure, defining and teaching expectations, actively engaging students, having a continuum of supports to support appropriate behavior, and a continuum of supports to decrease the likelihood of inappropriate behavior. I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these. Some of them are going to be a lot more familiar to you than others, I think. Again, you all have the book now, so you can look up and see if what I'm saying is accurate. In the classroom, when we talk about structure, there's a few different parts of structure in the classroom. We have the physical structure of the classroom, which we can't always do much about. Okay? I've had some classrooms that are repurposed science closets. I've had some classrooms that are far away from. It depends on where you teach and what you're doing. That's not something we can always control, but what we can control is that embedded structure, our routines in the classroom, what happens on a day-to-day basis. Okay? In the classroom, what are some routines that everyone should know? What are some routines that we need to be actively teaching our students? Okay, so how to get permission, how to ask for help, how to use the restroom, but do we have a pass system? Do we raise our hands? Can we just go and come back? Okay. In the classroom, we suggest that teachers have 3 to 5 positively stated expectations, just like in school-wide positive behavior interventions and supports. When I had my classroom in Bridgeport, one of my classrooms there, we were not in a school-wide PBIS school. So I had my own classroom expectations, and I had the Homer, which was honesty, organization, manners, effort, and respect. Very proud of that. No longer contextually relevant, by the way. No one really watches The Simpsons anymore except me. But at the time, it was kind of cool. And I gave away Bart Bucks, contingent unappropriate behavior, when students were following the Homer. Okay? However, if you are in a school-wide PBIS school, the classroom expectations should match the school-wide expectations. So, and I showed this example earlier. So on the left, you have your expectations: respect, responsibility, ready to learn. Across the top, you have classroom-specific routines. So up here, I have generic examples: group work, independent seat work, quizzes and tests, arrival and dismissal. If you're in an art classroom, you would have cleanup. If you're in a science classroom, you would have lab. If you're a school nurse, you would have, I don't know, cot procedures. I don't know, I'm not too sure what they do in school nurses' office, but you would have some behaviors about some expectations about how to behave in the nurse's office. So these routines, every classroom should have a different matrix with routines that are contextually and culturally appropriate for that classroom. And then you define this expectation in terms of the routine. So you have 2 to 3 specific behaviors. What does it look like to be respectful during group work? Well, it looks like offering ideas and completing all tasks. What does it look like to be ready to learn when you arrive? Close locker doors quietly, move chairs quietly. Please notice that it doesn't say don't slam. You want all of your behaviors to be stated positively. You want to remind people about what they should be doing rather than what they should not be doing. Okay? So you have your expectations, your routines, and then what the behaviors look like and sound like positively stated. And as I mentioned earlier, just hanging up the matrix alone does not behavior change make. Okay? Any more than hanging up a word wall would teach vocabulary, or hanging up a number line teaches positive and negative integers. You actually need to teach the content. Okay, so we know how to teach. This is good, we're teachers, so we know how to teach skills. Teaching social skills is the same as teaching academic skills. It might look a little different. Students probably have some base knowledge, but we can't hold students accountable for content we don't teach, whether it's academic or social behavior content. Okay? So you have to make sure that you teach like academics. Model, lead, test is effective. I do, we do, you do. People say, well, that doesn't work in high school. I beg to differ. Any of this will work in any setting. And I tell you this as somebody who used this in a residential facility for kids who are locked up. You have to sell it as the educator. If you say, this is stupid and my principals make me do this stupid thing, and the kids are not going to buy into it, but if you buy into the system and you set it up and it's contextually and culturally appropriate and you sell it to this, they're going to be engaged in it. And if you make it part of the classroom culture, it becomes part of the classroom culture. And everybody will engage in those processes. Make sure that students are getting a lot of feedback on these behaviors. How would they know if they're doing them correctly or not unless you tell them? And then make sure you assess how well they're doing. How well do they understand the content? And that could be done informally. If you're teaching hand raising, you can see if people are raising their hands. If you're doing a more nuanced social skill like appropriate participation in class discussion or courteous behavior towards other people, you may need to think of a different way to assess those. Okay? All right. We good so far? Pace is okay? Volume's okay? You're very quiet, so I'm not sure how to respond. How do we keep students actively engaged while we're teaching? First of all, having a room full of 100 people where you stand up at the front and talk at them is not your best strategy, right? So let's pretend I'm modeling something slightly better than what we're doing right now. What are some ways that we keep students actively engaged? Okay, so we provide them with choice. We allow them to take on some teaching roles. We do some partnering, turn and talk. We do all kinds of different things to keep students engaged while they're learning. One of the things to think about, what are the teacher behaviors that impact student learning? So designing our lesson and thinking about social skills that we're trying to impart, these shouldn't be two separate things. Okay? Our lessons, what we're teaching, we need to, one of the things that's frustrating for me after years and years and years of doing this kind of thing is that academic support and behavior support are often just two entirely separate entities. And unless things in Connecticut have changed a lot since I left here many years ago, I feel like that's probably still the case in a lot of schools, is that academic and social behavior supports are just two separate things. Like we do RTI and school-wide PBIS. They're basically the same thing, right? Basically multi-tiered systems of support, but we do them differently. We train differently, we pretend that they're not the same thing, and then we introduce something like restorative practices, which I think is becoming a big deal here. It is in Texas for sure, and then we have that over here. We have behavior support here. And all of these things need to be integrated. Right? Providing tiered support for behavior is not different than providing it for academics. And integrating behavior support into academics makes perfect sense. When we're teaching a lesson that has group work, we should make sure we're imparting social skill instruction into the group work piece of the lesson. But we're not doing enough of that. And if you are, props to you, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just basing this on what I've seen over the years. We're not doing a good enough job aligning those two things. So, what are some things that teachers can think about when delivering instruction that impacts student behavior? And this morning I talked a little bit about cultural and contextual relevance, which I think is important. One of the other things to remember in terms of contextual and cultural relevance is you will make mistakes and you will say things that you wish you hadn't said, or you'll say something awkward, or it will just hit a wrong note or something. That's okay. Like, it's better to have a conversation about something that's difficult, make a mistake, and then be able to learn from that than never have the conversation at all in the first place. Okay? It's challenging, but if we don't do it, like these kind of things I'm talking about, the racial disparity in discipline, the achievement gap, you are here in Connecticut, you know that we have Bridgeport School District is very different from Fairfield, and you can literally see one from the other, but we have a big achievement gap problem. And we need to start having some conversations about why and how we fix it. And some of those are society we can't fix, but some of them are internal in our schools, and we need to do a better job of addressing those. So thinking about contextual and cultural relevance for everything we do in terms of the classroom. What else? How does our behavior impact our students' engagement? I'm sorry? Yeah, the tone that you have, like you have to be enthusiastic about what you're teaching. And that gets harder and harder because the more we're focused on tests and the more we're thinking about that and the more our autonomy comes out of the classroom, it's hard to get excited. But if a student says to you, why are we learning this, and you don't have an answer, that's a big problem. Okay, there has to be a reason that that content is relevant to the student. And you're not going to love everything that you're teaching. Like, I teach all the graduate level research courses. I don't anymore, but I used to teach a lot of graduate research courses. And I don't know what you know about master's programs, but usually that research course is the one that students fear and loathe the most. And when I was at Assumption College in Massachusetts for 6 years, and I taught the graduate research course there. And the first time I taught it, I was new faculty. I drew the short straw. I had to teach the research course. And I kind of approached it like, oh, you guys, I'm really sorry you have to take this course. I know it's a drag. Like, we're in it together. We'll suffer through it. And my evaluations were terrible. So I learned very quickly that students do not want like a partner to commiserate with in their professor. They actually want somebody who's going to make the content relevant and important for them. And I taught it almost every year that I was there, and I began to try and integrate I let them pick the topics they wanted to research. I used my own research, and I like research and data and statistics, and I kind of let my nerd flag fly a little bit more than I had previously. And I can't say I turned them all into lovers of educational research, but many of them hated it slightly less. And for me, that was a big goal. But you can't just it's the same thing with selling a classroom management system. If you just sort of phone it in, the kids will know. And the more intensive the behavior problems that kids have, the more likely they are to pick up on those kinds of things. Kids with behavior problems can always spot problems in other people very astutely. So our tone, our level of enthusiasm, our body language, what else? Yes?
You mentioned before behaviors that we model, which is so true. But an example that I have is with our technology. How we use our technology. We have such huge challenges getting kids to turn off their technology, put away their technology, use their Chromebooks correctly for what they're supposed to be using it for during the lesson. And then you see a teacher texting her kids to find out, what time to pick them up from school, as you've just told the kids.
Right.
That's using phones, they better not, and I think it can be a really mixed message that goes on with technology.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's a very good example. So we need to, if we don't want our students to have their technology out and in use, we need to do the same thing. And just, the argument, of course, is, well, I'm a teacher and I can do what I want. That may be true, but if we really want to model the appropriate behaviors, we need to be doing that. One thing, students do need to learn pragmatics, and that teachers' behavior expectations are different from students' expectations, but that's a more sophisticated level of learning that we can get into a little bit later. But we really need to think about modeling the behaviors that we want to see. And in terms of technology, I've seen the whole range of technology expectations, from, hey, you do whatever you want on your phone, it's fine with me, to you will give me your phone when you come through the door, right? And there's every kind of policy in between, and you're all nodding like you know both policies and you have your own. And then, of course, when students get a little bit older and they switch classes, and then one teacher is fine with it and then the next teacher is not fine with it, then you have these sort of conflicting things, which is why a school-wide approach to behavioral expectations is so nice. But if you have your classroom matrix, you can have technology as one of the routines. And even in my university syllabi. I teach undergraduate, master's, and doctoral level courses, and every one of them has a matrix in it for, and if any of you want it, I will send it to you, for the expected behaviors in my college classes, because technology is an issue all the way up through university. And I mean, everyone, the way I look at college classes is people are paying to be there, so if they want to engage in texting or whatever during my class, I have less leverage than I would sort of in a K-12 environment. But I do have an expectation that people are not engaging with their technology during class. And my way, I say, please put your phone off and away. If you need to use your technology, please get up and leave. And I've had to send undergraduates in particular, I've had to send a blanket email out or and just remind people of the expectations. And then I've also had to do some individualized interventions and say, by the way, I hope everything is okay. Since I mentioned that you are only to be using your phone in an emergency and you were on your phone the whole class, it seems like you must be having quite a few emergencies. So I hope everything's okay, but I would remind you that the expectation is to leave the classroom if that's the case. And then I usually get an email back, which is like, no, I was taking notes on my phone, which is not true. No one does that, right? So, but just making sure that if we have those expectations, we're following up, we're allowing for mistakes, people can't live without their phones. Like many of you are engaging with your phones now as I'm saying this, so you understand it very well. I think it's okay to say, no phones for the first 30 minutes, then we'll take a 5-minute break. Whatever's going to make the most sense. And then you can go and tell your kids what time you're picking them up and then come back and re-engage with the class. But it needs to be a policy that everybody understands and that is reinforced. We need to be rewarding the kids that don't engage with technology when they're not supposed to, instead of just punishing the kids that do. Focusing on those behaviors that we want to see and being very clear about our expectations. Okay. In terms of engagement, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to mention that we didn't cover, but I think we got most of them, making sure we're modeling our tone, our body language, thinking about pace, thinking about differentiating our instruction to meet the needs of all learners. And I'm talking about both behavioral and academic instruction. I don't see those two things as separate. Okay? I spent a lot of time during the keynote talking about reinforcing appropriate behavior, but I want to mention it again, particularly behavior-specific praise. When I only have a few minutes to talk to teachers, which is, every now and then I'll just have a group of teachers, I can only share a couple of things with them. There's two things that I really want them to focus on. One is behavior-specific praise, and the other one is specific error correction, because those are two things that you can do quickly without a ton of training, and that both are very impactful on student behavior. And they're both things that once you start doing them and you start getting reinforced for using those behaviors, you'll build internal capacity and be able to use them all the time. With reinforcement, I can't say this enough, we have to pay at least as much attention to behaviors that we want to see as we do to behaviors that we don't want to see. Again, I know I said it this morning, but as a society, as educators, we're not that good at this. We pay a lot more attention to behaviors that don't meet expectations than we do to behaviors that do. And that's really unfortunate. We have a lot of support ready for students who don't meet our expectations, but we don't have as much there for students who do. When you go into schools and you ask them about behavior expectations, they pull out their handbook and they have a flow chart, and 3 minors equals a major, and 3 majors equals suspension, and 3 suspensions equal expulsion. They have this very complicated algorithm for how we respond to inappropriate behavior. And then we say, what do you do for students who are engaging in appropriate behavior? And they have student of the month, once a month for one student out of the 1,200 in the school. It's not a commensurate response, right? It's very different. And until that changes, it's not surprising that we see so much more inappropriate behavior. And also, when we're modeling behavior, we think about bullying, we think about this culture and aggression and people yelling, and if you turn on cable news, no matter which network you favor, people are always mad at each other, and then we don't understand why the kids fight and why the kids bully and why the kids become aggressive with each other. But think about what we're modeling. And we don't model, nobody watches PBS because there's no yelling, right, on the news shows. I mean, some of you probably watch Connecticut, people like NPR and things here, I understand this. But in general, we want drama and we want excitement and we want our politics to be dirty and dragged down and big. And that's, then we're upset because the kids engage in those behaviors, and we can't have it both ways. You can't model aggression and then be upset when the kids are aggressive. It just doesn't work. So we need to be paying at least as much attention to the behaviors we want to see as we do to the behaviors we don't. We need to have a continuum of support. Some students are going to need more reinforcement than others. But the very first level is this behavior-specific feedback. And then you can look at more intensive processes like group contingencies and token economies, which I'm not going to go into today, but there's a chapter in the book on them if you want to do a little more research. Behavior-specific praise, in the spirit of full disclosure, was the topic of my dissertation research as well, so I have a soft spot in my heart for it. Behavior-specific praise looks like identifying the learner, so making sure the person who's being praised knows that he or she is receiving the praise, identifying the specific behavior that we're acknowledging, and it happens contingently on the behavior. So, great job raising your hand. I really like how you participated in class. Thank you for taking notes quietly during this presentation. That's specifically directed to this table. They're doing a very nice job, okay? So now I feel like you've been listening to me for a long time. We're going to do an example and a non-example. So thumbs up if this is an example of specific praise, and thumbs down if not. Do you understand the instructions? Very good. I love teachers. Okay. So for the following, thumbs up if it's specific and contingent, thumbs down if not. Rod, I like how you're sitting quietly. That's a specific praise statement. Very good. Todd, you're doing a great job. We don't know what Todd is doing, so that is a thumbs down. Very good. Class, you all did very well staying on task. Yesterday, it's not as contingent as we would like, but it's still specific. Ned, you're doing a great job taking notes. Specific praise statement. Maud, your skirt is lovely. It just doesn't make that. I was just seeing if you were paying attention. That's a compliment. That's not in any way specific praise. I like how Sherry and Terry are raising their hands. That is a specific praise statement. That's the way to do it, Nelson. Keep it up. We don't know what Nelson is doing, so in no way does he get a thumbs up. Okay, and this is behavior-specific praise takes a little bit of effort. We're already probably doing some good job, nice work. Behavior-specific praise is a little bit more effort, but the impact is very, very high. Like it's low effort, high impact strategy. And that's why if you take one thing away from today and you want to tell other people one thing that will make a difference in their classroom, this is really it. So the question, of course, why is specific praise so much more effective? What do you think? Good. So it increases the chance of that behavior recurring because the person knows exactly why he or she is being praised. So if I just come over and I say, hey, great job. Like, first of all, it's creepy, okay, because she has no idea why I'm saying that. And second of all, you don't even know what you would need to keep doing if you wanted to have more contingent attention for your behavior. But if I say, great job paying attention and having your eyes oriented toward the speaker and following along, that's much different. So that's not only a good indication for the learner, who else is helped by that? Everyone else, right? So it's a verbal prompt for everybody else to know what the expected behaviors are. So if I say, hey, great job, paying attention and having your eyes oriented on the speaker, and now other people are like, well, I'd like some of that contingent attention, so I'm going to engage in the same behavior. Okay, they're not actively thinking that, but that's the process that's happening. I'm actively thinking that, by the way. That's how my brain works. Does that make sense? So everybody understands the behavior that's expected. The learner now knows. And the other thing is we talked a lot earlier about attention being a big reinforcer for students. And there's no way you can deliver a specific praise statement if you're not paying attention to the person who is receiving the statement, right? Like I can just say, good job, good job, good job, good job all day. But if I go over to you and I say, hey, great job taking notes. I really like that question you asked. It was really relevant to the discussion. I have to be paying attention to you. And whether students consciously acknowledge that, a very detailed praise statement is much more effective than just sort of a good job in terms of providing contingent attention. Does that make sense? Okay. So a little bit more, praise should be delivered in your natural demeanor. So many of you have not known me that long. Some of you have known me for over 10 years, but many of you have not known me for that long. But I am sort of a low-key, more phlegmatic type. That's the English major, by the way. That's the only time I get to use it is by sometimes using better vocabulary words. But I'm sort of laid back, like not very like, oh my God, great job, everybody, you did it. Like if I praised you that way, it would be weird, okay? But if I was a very sort of Richard Simmons-y elementary school teacher. I was like, oh my God, class, it's great that you're here. And then I suddenly said, good job sitting down quietly. That would be weird. So you want your praise to be delivered in your natural demeanor as much as possible. And of course, you're going to have students who don't respond well to praise. What are some options for giving feedback to those students? Yeah, so you could do it quietly, you could do it on their way out, you could write them a little note, you could develop some kind of signal, you could call home and tell their parents or their family that they had a great day. There's different options. If students don't find that public attention reinforcing, they're probably going to stop engaging in that behavior, which is the opposite of what you want to happen. Okay? Behavior-specific praise makes a big difference. And that's the, if you do nothing else, do this part of this discussion. Praise should sound sincere. Not all students will find praise reinforcing. Other ways to acknowledge appropriate behavior, group contingencies. A lot of you probably do this kind of thing already. You have a jar, and when the students get to a certain point, the whole class has a party, right? There's different kinds of options. Unfortunately, what I've seen in schools in terms of group contingencies, a lot of times they're sort of punitive in nature. Like I'll see a teacher write recess on the board and then erase a letter every time the class is off task. And so the problem is, of course, if you erase that last letter by 9 o'clock in the morning and then the student, like, you're done, you have nothing else to go. I mean, much better is to add a letter every time the students are behaving appropriately and then give them an extra minute for every, right? That makes much more sense. And then token economies. Most of you are probably familiar with how token economies work. You give a token contingent on appropriate behavior, and then students can exchange it. Like I mentioned, the BART bucks, which I gave out, and then students would exchange them for different items or free time. The reason token economies work better than group contingencies usually is because students can pick their own reinforcer. Like if you have a group contingency, everybody earns a pizza party, and you have a student who's out that day or who hates pizza. I don't know who hates pizza, but if somebody did, it wouldn't be reinforcing. With a token economy, you can select your own reinforcer. Okay? The thing about token economies is that people like to have response cost, which means if you giveth, you also taketh away. So you give tokens contingent on appropriate behavior, take them away contingent on inappropriate behavior. I'm not a fan. And I am biased because my history of the kids that I've worked with, they are always the last to earn anything and the first to lose everything. So they always have the lowest balance to begin with. And then even when I was giving out the BART bucks and I was using the Homer, and I was using that when I was working at the residential facility, first of all, there's a logistical issue. So if you have BART bucks and I say, hey, you said the F word, you owe me 3 BART bucks, and the kid says, I'm not giving them to you. Okay, well, but I want them. Like, I'm not going to physically remove them from your person, so now I'm not sure what to do. And the other problem is, okay, you said a swear word, you owe me 3 BART bucks, I don't have any. My response is going to be what? Well, when you get some, give them to me. So there's really not a lot of incentive for the student to engage in appropriate behavior. And the other thing with response cost is that's not the way the real world actually works. Like think about if you've ever been a waiter or waitress, or you ever had a part-time job or a non-salaried position, you get paid hourly, you get paid when you go to work. If you call in sick, they don't take money away that you've already earned, you just don't earn money for the day that you're there, for the time that you're there. And I've had to use that analogy a lot. I don't know how things are going here in the nutmeg state, but I do know how things are going in Texas, and Texans love the red, yellow, green chart in their classrooms. They love it. Do you all know what I'm talking about? So they have the red, yellow, green chart, and then the student, always my students, always ones with challenging behavior, they have to make that walk of shame over and move their clip down to the red part. And some teachers get clever and they change up the colors, and they'll have like the orange, purple, turquoise chart. We know who the turquoise kids are. Like we know who they are. So, but when I suggest that maybe this sort of public humiliation model is not the best way to acknowledge behavior, people get very upset. They love the red, yellow, green chart. They don't know what to do. So I've come up with some alternatives for them because I really didn't have a choice. Like I have a monochromatic color. And then the students all start on the bottom at the beginning of the day. And then after a period or after a set amount of time, we move them up if they've met expectations for that period. And if they haven't, they just don't move up, okay? Or they don't earn for a certain amount of time, right? And then they can As soon as they start meeting expectations, they can keep moving. Right, they don't drop down if they don't meet expectations. They just don't continue to earn. And this, people have begrudgingly accepted this a little bit, but it's a better system because if you lose everything you could possibly earn by 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, your day is shot. I worked with one school that had a program called Challenge 25s for all 8th graders, and they started the year with 25 points, and every time they committed an infraction, they would lose one of their 25 points, and then they would miss out on the 8th grade trip at the end of the year. So the kind of kids I work with, they lost those 25 points by September 5th. You know what I mean? Like they were already out of the loop. And then it wasn't, better to have them earn throughout the year because it's much easier to give than to take away. So that's my response to the response cost system. And then finally, discouraging inappropriate behavior. And I mentioned this morning, but it's worth repeating. I want you to think about these two scenarios. During class, a student makes a loud and off-topic comment, like, it's a good day for getting rowdy, or I was up all night playing Pokemon Go. I don't really know if that's still a thing, or this class sucks, or something inappropriate, loud enough for other people to hear. And a typical teacher response to that is, quit talking, or my favorite, is that appropriate? You both know the answer. The answer is no, okay? You don't need to ask the student if that's appropriate. So standard teacher response is some kind of reprimand, cut it out, don't do that, quit talking, something along those lines. Okay? This scenario, a student mispronounces a word while he or she is reading. So the student says 7 when the word is severe, like there was a 7 thunderstorm last night. A typical teacher response here is to say, oh, hang on a second, why don't you try that again? I think you missed a word. The student goes back and reads it. Oh, okay, there was a severe thunderstorm last night. Teacher says, okay, much better, and then you move on. I think you can see where I'm going here, right? The challenge, of course, is to respond to the behavior, the social behavior error, the same way you respond to the academic error. So student says something out loud that's not appropriate, and you say, hey, listen, we talked about being respectful in class. That's not respectful. Show me what that looks like. And the student quiets down or rephrases what he said. You say, okay, great, thanks, and you move on. Specific error correction. And then people will say, well, that's not going to work, or what if he doesn't calm down? That's okay. But this should be our first level of response. Because this student might not say that word correctly. He might keep mispronouncing the word. He may have some more issues that are preventing him from decoding correctly, but we wouldn't just get frustrated and stop, right? We would continue to try to find ways for that student to read successfully. We need to do the same thing with this student who's engaging in inappropriate social behavior. And I know, like I said, this kid more annoying than the kid who's not reading correctly, but we are teachers. And with that instructional mindset, we can actually make a difference in both types of behavior. So this specific and contingent error correction, it follows a very simple pattern. You identify the behavior, identify the expected behavior, reteach if necessary, provide feedback, reinforce as soon as the appropriate behavior is displayed. When students engage in problem behavior, they're all talking. We say, stop talking. They quiet down. We usually don't acknowledge that they did what they were supposed to do. We just start into our lesson. Okay, we're missing a chance. We say, hey guys, stop talking. And they quiet down and say, great, thank you for not talking. Let's get started. We miss that chance to give them some feedback. But if they kept talking, we sure would let them know. So we really need to switch that mindset if we can. We need to make sure that our responses to inappropriate behavior do not inadvertently reinforce problem behavior, like throwing Roger out of the classroom when he's not wanting to be there in the first place. Removal from the environment is only effective if the student didn't want to be in that environment in the first place. I don't have time to go into it, of course, but some of the responses to problem behavior that I'm interested in have this sort of restitution approach. And if you've wasted the class's time or you've wronged another person, you actually have to make restitution. You make it right. I like ownership of inappropriate behavior being between the teacher and student. I'm not a big proponent of teacher sends student away to get consequence, student comes back, and the teacher's not part of that process. Like, I feel like if we're really concerned about relationships and building that classroom climate, we need to have more ownership of what happens when our students don't meet our expectations. Okay. So all behaviors are learned through consequences, both academic and social behaviors. Learning academic behaviors takes a long time. For some students, it takes forever, and they never get really good at some of them. The same thing happens with social behaviors. we can't just assume all students should be behaving at a certain level any more than they were all going to get the academic content the same way at the same pace. Okay? I think I have 2 minutes left for any questions and discussion. You've all been so quiet that I'm going to chalk your quietness up to your just rapt attention because I'm so engaging. But you've been very quiet and you seem to be awake, so that's a good sign. If you have any questions right now, I'm happy to take them, or we can all sort of mill around quietly and you can come and ask me things if you want. So I'm going to take an obligatory few seconds and we'll just sort of look awkwardly at each other. Yes?
In your example of the student that shouts something inappropriate and maybe the other kids are laughing and
Mm-hmm.
being positively reinforced, you would say, when teachers in my class say that's inappropriate, step outside.
Mm-hmm.
You would say that's not how we are respectful.
Well, hopefully you've taught your expectations and you have a matrix. So you could say, being respectful in class looks like X, Y, and Z. You already have it there. Show me what that looks like, and then the student can do it. And then you want to point out, I really like how Sally and Timmy stayed on task. You don't want to say like, I like how you guys didn't laugh when all these other chumps were laughing, right? You want to make sure you don't draw any attention to the inappropriate behavior. But if you have students that stay on task when someone else, make sure that you point that out as well. And certainly it's not easy to make this switch, but if you can start thinking about problem behaviors as mistakes, errors, it makes a huge difference. And it's so much better for teachers' mindset. Like if you're just viewing behavior errors as mistakes rather than sort of personal attacks on you or on your classroom, it makes it much easier to contend with them. Yes?
At our school, we're doing a lot for our school avoidance, and there's a problem in many areas. And what are some approaches that you've seen successful in managing that behavior? What are some campaigns you set up with customers?
So that's a little bit, so school avoidance, you're talking about like kids who just don't want to be in school or they don't go to school. So this is a little bit different. I mean, clearly the function of their behavior is to escape school. They just do not want to be there. And they're probably getting a lot of attention as well because they're not there, people are chasing them or they're begging them to come to school. So there's a couple of different things going on there. And these are going to be students who require more severe, not more severe, but more intensive supports than what we're giving already. So what I start with usually when I work with schools and students that are having issues like that is just a little bit at a time, sort of like systematic desensitization. Like if they can come to school and behave appropriately for 5 minutes, they can have a 2-minute break. Or if they can do an hour and work and build up and really reinforce them with a break, maybe with some attention, like maybe a break with a friend or a break with a teacher. And people don't like that, and they'll say, well, he just needs to be in school all day. And I say, well, he's running out of the school now. Like, this is better. Like, 5 minutes of being in school and then reinforcing is better than no minutes of being in school with everybody chasing and potentially reinforcing anyway. Because if the student is running out of the building or trying to get out of, and we're reinforcing that with attention and by him not being there. So if we can set it up, so even if it starts with a couple of minutes or 10 minutes and shape that behavior into an hour, 2 hours, making it to lunch, it's going to take a long time, but behavior change is really slow, as I keep mentioning. It can be slow even if students are picking it up quickly, but especially like that because running out of school is so effective for getting out of school. Like it's a really handy behavior if you don't want to be there in the first place. So my advice is to kind of try to minimize attention as much as possible when those avoidant behavior happen and really start small and reinforce being in school even for small amounts of time. Yeah?
So for tier 1, you're saying you're handing out tokens or reinforcers or blocks, whatever. If our goal is to have kids do that, but nowadays we're having generalized, how do you get rid of the tokens?
Oh, that's a great question. And this will be the last, I know I'm at my time, so I'll give you one quick answer to that, and we can talk a little bit more if you want. So the question was about, we don't want kids, I'm going to paraphrase, we don't want kids dependent on tokens forever, and how do we change it? So that's a great question. Once students build fluency with the desired behavior, we have a couple of options. Like what I like to do is increase the sophistication of the behaviors that we actually reinforce. So now if I'm just reinforcing hand raises with a token, that's great. Maybe we're not good at hand raising, but once we get good at that, I want to reinforce hand raising with a pertinent contribution to the class discussion. And I want to reduce the amount of reinforcement available for just a plain old hand raise. And sometimes kids are going to, some kids are going to be good, some kids are not going to be good. And then eventually we need to sort of phase out all, and that's a really good question because we're not good, we like token economies, we install them and then we just leave them. But they should, just like with academics, we don't teach the same skills all year and keep assessing the kids on the same skill. We increase our expectations for what kids need to know and do, and we need to do the same thing with behavior. And then we start pointing out the natural contingencies of behaving better. Here's what's going to happen to you next year. Here's how this relates to when you move from second grade to third grade, or when you move from high school to job interviews, and we start doing those kinds of things. And then reinforcing intermittently, thinking about our schedule of reinforcement. We have a chapter in the book that talks about that because it's one of our concerns as people who do this work. So people are like, yay, we set up a token economy. We never need to worry about it again, but you're right. If we never increase our expectations for students, they're never going to improve their behaviors beyond what we've set up. So I like the idea of increasing what we want to see from them and then reinforcing less and less often with less and less intensity.